For a long time, Mexican cartels have been on the loose, killing millions and destroying communities. However, recently, they crossed the line. After a ruthless attack that left 10 U.S. veterans dead, the Delta Force has now responded with a swift, brutal, and unstoppable attack. The formidable force is determined to unleash hell on cartels in a mission so intense, it sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. Delta forces destroy Mexican cartels. Authorities in northern Mexico recently confirmed the killing of a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, Nicholas Quetz, in an attack believed to be carried out by gunmen linked to a drug cartel. The incident occurred near a gas station between the towns of Altar and Caborca in Sonora, a border state known for cartel activity. According to reports, Quetz, an Arizona resident, was traveling to the beach resort of Puerto Penasco, commonly known as Rocky Point, at the time of the attack. Local media suggested that his vehicle may have unknowingly passed through a cartel-controlled checkpoint just before he was shot. Following the murder, security forces engaged with the suspected attackers in the town of Altar, and during the confrontation, 2 individuals were killed. Authorities later released footage of the suspects on social media. One of the assailants was identified as a Honduran national with an outstanding warrant for desertion from Honduras's Presidential Honor Guard. His involvement gave authorities a hint about how Mexican drug cartels often recruit former military personnel from Central and South America, taking advantage of their combat training and experience. In addition to the Honduran suspect, 2 other individuals were arrested in connection with Quetz's killing. One of them was reportedly affiliated with a gang operating under the Chapitos, a faction of the powerful Sinaloa drug cartel. Following the incident, former Delta Force operator Brent Tucker promised to smash drug cartels if Trump gives the order. Tucker, a veteran of Delta Force with extensive combat experience, argued that drug cartels function similarly to terrorist organizations. Their tactics rely on ambushes, car bombs, and targeting vulnerable individuals. These methods, according to Tucker, differ significantly from the highly disciplined and technologically advanced approach of Tier 1 units of the Delta Force. He noted that while cartels may be well-armed and dangerous, they lack the rigorous training, resources, and operational expertise that elite U.S. military forces possess. While making a speech, Tucker threatened that a direct confrontation between Tier 1 units and cartel forces would overwhelmingly favor Tier 1. He further explained that, although military operations often carry inherent risks and potential casualties, the cartels would be outmatched in terms of strategy, firepower, and execution. Unlike cartels, which primarily operate through fear and opportunistic attacks, Delta Force and other Tier 1 teams undergo relentless training, refining their skills in high-intensity combat scenarios. Also, their access to advanced technology and intelligence assets would likely enhance their ability to destroy cartel operations efficiently. Tucker's threats have sparked a lot of debate, forcing many to probe further into how deadly the U.S. Delta Force is. When it comes to elite military units, only few are as feared and respected as the U.S. Army's Delta Force. Officially known as the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, Delta Force operates in the shadows, conducting high-risk missions that are too dangerous for conventional military forces. Their operations include counterterrorism, hostage rescues, and covert missions that require extreme precision and skill. So how dangerous is Delta Force really? Well, simply put, Delta Force isn't for the average soldier. In fact, most people who attempt to join never make it through the selection process. Unlike other military units that simply recruit fresh soldiers, Delta Force primarily selects experienced soldiers from special operations units like the Army Rangers and Green Berets. In terms of training, Delta Force operators are trained to be the deadliest soldiers in the world. Their training covers close quarters battle, sniper operations, explosives, hand-to-hand combat, and advanced driving techniques. The military unit has been involved in some of the most dangerous and high-profile missions in modern history. One of these is the hunting down of Osama bin Laden. Delta operators were involved in the decade-long manhunt for bin Laden, working alongside SEAL Team 6. Similarly, the Delta Force has been responsible for eliminating high-value ISIS targets, including key leaders. These key factors and many others make the Delta Force one of the deadliest military organizations ever seen, which means Mexican cartels are likely in for a rough. The Defense Department announced the deployment of 1,500 active-duty troops to the border. This move is intended to reinforce the troops that are already engaged in enforcement operations in the region. The decision follows an executive order from President Trump, which declared a national emergency at the border and directed the Defense Department to take necessary actions to support Homeland Security efforts. In response, military operatives established a task force to oversee the rapid implementation of these directives. The operation is reportedly being led by U.S. Northern Command, with support from U.S. Transportation Command, the National Guard Bureau, the Military Services, and the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. The additional personnel being deployed consist of 1,000 soldiers and 500 Marines. With 2,500 active duty service members already positioned at the border, the new deployment provides a 60% increase in military presence presence at the border. Beyond ground personnel, the Defense Department will also provide airlift support to DHS, facilitating the deportation of more than 5,000 people who are currently detained at border facilities in San Diego and El Paso, Texas. For a long time, the U.S. has planned to wage war on cartels that are killing Americans. These cartels, which are highly organized criminal organizations, have expanded their influence across the southern border, operating as industrialized networks of crime, terror, and human exploitation. According to experts, cartels represent one of the most pressing threats to national health, security, and public safety, with their actions fueling a crisis that continues to devastate countless lives. In just 3 years, about 250,000 Americans have lost their lives to drug overdoses, a figure that surpasses the total U.S. casualties in the Vietnam War. The primary culprits behind this crisis are the Mexican drug cartels, which are responsible for producing and smuggling the vast majority of lethal substances, including fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin. Fentanyl, in particular, has emerged as one of the deadliest threats. It's said that just 2 milligrams, an amount equivalent to a few grains of sand, is capable of killing an adult. In past years, cartels have established massive production facilities to manufacture fentanyl on an industrial scale. Authorities have previously intercepted an estimated 2.5 billion lethal doses at the border in a single year. Beyond the drug trade, the cartels also control the world's most extensive human trafficking networks. They facilitate the illegal migration of millions of individuals from Central and South America, often subjecting them to unimaginable suffering along the way. Women and children are particularly vulnerable, facing sexual violence, extortion, and brutalization at the hands of cartel operatives. Sadly, many of these people are abandoned in the desert or left to suffocate in overcrowded transport vehicles. Given the scale and brutality of cartel operations, experts argue that addressing this crisis requires more than just political implementations or policy statements. They claim that a decisive and strategic approach is necessary to combat the growing power of these cartels and prevent further harm. In a debate that went viral on social media, popular veteran Evan Hafer forecasted this next chapter in the war against cartels. Evan is a former Green Beret and CIA operative who has been outspoken about this issue, advocating for the deployment of U.S. Special Forces to combat the cartels directly. In a conversation with podcaster Joe Rogan, Evan argued that the cartels would be unprepared for the level of military force the United States could unleash, describing it as a wave of ultra-violence that could dismantle their operations within 2 years. Evan's perspective aligns with popular discussions among political leaders who have proposed treating the cartels as terrorist organizations. The CIA operative referenced statements made by J.D. Vance and President Donald Trump, who suggested mobilizing top-tier military units against the cartels. He explained that the strategy would involve deploying elite forces such as Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 to eliminate cartel leaders and disrupt their operations in a manner similar to the War on Terror. During the discussion, Rogan highlighted how the cartel violence has negatively affected the economy and security landscape of both Mexico and the United States. He expressed concern over the proximity of these violent organizations to the U.S. border, noting that the level of brutality seen in cartel-controlled areas is alarming. In response, Evan reinforced this concern, suggesting that if elite military units were deployed against both cartels and human traffickers, the problem could be effectively eradicated. But is this really possible? Recently, a Quora user discussed the ability of 35 Delta Force soldiers to take down a major Mexican drug cartel. In the discussion, the user argued that the ability of 35 Delta Force soldiers to pull this off would depend on multiple factors, including the mission objectives, the cartel's strength, as well as cooperation from local law enforcement. While Delta Force is among the most elite special operations units in the world, taking down a powerful cartel would present significant challenges that go beyond direct combat. One of the primary considerations is the strength of the cartel itself. Major drug cartels operate with extensive resources, including highly trained armed personnel, financial backing, and deep-rooted local support. A small force of 35 soldiers, even with superior training and equipment, would probably be at a disadvantage if faced with a well-armed organization with home field advantages. Likewise, the success of such an operation would also depend on the mission's objectives. If the goal were to capture key cartel leaders or disrupt drug shipments, a highly targeted and strategic approach might be effective. However, completely dismantling a cartel's entire operation would require a much larger and sustained effort. The Quora user noted that direct confrontation alone would likely be insufficient, as cartels often have decentralized leadership structures that allow them to continue operating even after high-profile arrests or eliminations. Another critical factor that was discussed is cooperation from and with local law enforcement and military forces. Many cartels have strong ties within communities and even with corrupt officials in law enforcement and government agencies. So without reliable local support, any foreign operation would face significant resistance, not just from cartel members, but potentially potentially from local authorities who may want to protect them. The recent battle between Delta Force and Mexican cartels is only a fraction of the long-standing war between the cartels and the U.S. government. So what does America's war against Mexican cartels really look like? The war against Mexican cartels. Trump has repeatedly outlined plans to militarize law enforcement. His proposed plans for a second term involve a significant expansion of federal law enforcement powers, including increased militarization, aggressive crackdowns on border crossings, and a heightened use of the death penalty. These proposals, if enacted, are expected to cause an extension of presidential authority and raise serious concerns about the potential for civil liberties violations. Critics even argue that such measures may end up weaponizing federal agencies against civilians. An analysis conducted by the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington examined over 13,000 posts made by Trump between January 2023 and April 2024. The findings from this analysis indicate that Trump has publicly vowed at least 19 times to use law enforcement and military forces against various groups, including drug dealers and border crossers. Interestingly, Trump's approach to law enforcement is not without precedent. During his first term, the president took steps toward increasing militarization at the U.S.-Mexico border, deploying over 5,000 National Guard troops. Now reports suggest that a second Trump administration could see an even greater escalation, with the possible deployment of 100,000 to 300,000 federal troops to the border. By contrast, former President George Bush deployed only 6,000 troops, and Barack Obama sent just 1,200. In addition to sending troops into Mexico, Trump has also designated some Mexican cartels as terrorists. Recently, the U.S. State Department officially classified several Mexican drug cartels, along with the gangs MS-13 and Tren de Aragua, as foreign terrorist organizations. This designation, signed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, allows for potential financial sanctions against these groups and increases the legal tools available to combat their activities. The cartels included in the designation are the Sinaloa Cartel, Jalisco Nueva Generación Cartel, Carteles Unidos, Cartel del Noreste, Cartel del Golfo, and La Nueva Familia Michoacana. Trump's decision to designate cartels stems from long-standing concerns over the violence and instability these organizations have caused throughout the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. government has blamed the cartels for widespread violence, drug trafficking, and criminal activity that has destabilized key regions and contributed to the influx of deadly drugs and organized crime in the United States. In the official designation, it was stated that there is sufficient factual basis to conclude that cartels engage in terrorist activities and pose a significant threat to U.S. national security. In response to the designation, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum noted that the move could open doors for increased collaboration with U.S. law enforcement, particularly in investigating money laundering operations that are linked to drug trafficking. However, while Sheinbaum accepted the idea, she rejected any actions that would violate Mexico's sovereignty. She further emphasized the importance of targeting financial networks that operate within the U.S., especially since the sale of drugs in the United States ultimately fuels cartel profits. Alongside Trump's plan to launch military attacks and send special forces, the president also plans to send kill squads to take out Mexican cartel heads. According to reports, Trump has advocated for a military approach similar to the U.S. operation that killed ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in 2019. His plan includes deploying elite military units to eliminate cartel leaders, regardless of whether the Mexican government consents to such actions. In his discussions with allies, Trump reportedly suggested that the U.S. should maintain a kill list of major drug lords. He suggested that this list could be used by special forces to either capture or assassinate key figures in the cartels. For a long time, Trump has publicly proposed using special forces, cyber warfare, and both overt and covert operations to dismantle cartel leadership and operations. However, while he has strongly advocated for this, experts have noted that such a strategy could raise serious legal, diplomatic, and operational concerns. Conducting assassinations on foreign soil without consent could strain U.S.-Mexico relations and potentially violate international law. Additionally, defense experts warn that targeting individual leaders may not be enough to dismantle well-established and resilient groups like cartels. But despite these warnings, Trump seems determined to push forward with his plans. While exploring the possibilities of this invasion, some experts have gone further to reveal what Trump's attack on Mexican cartels could look like. America's first approach to defeat the cartels was an all-of-the-above set of policy solutions that recognized cartel threats to national security. This approach recognizes cartels as public enemies for all Americans and proposes policy solutions that reflect the severity of their threat. The first step in the America First approach is to secure the border. It requires the federal government to resume construction of the border wall system, which is a needed barrier to stop the flow of fentanyl across the border and prevent cartels from smuggling drugs and illegal aliens. It requires the government to reinstate immigration policies policies, like the Remain in Mexico policy, which requires asylum seekers to await their court dates in Mexico. This policy prevents migrants from paying the cartels for passage into the United States. During the first Trump administration, this policy was extremely successful in disrupting the cartel's pipeline of human and drug trafficking, so it could be helpful to implement it once again. Another method that was suggested is for the U.S. to come to terms with the technological advancement of the cartels and directly counter their actions using proactive measures to stop their criminal enterprises. This method could involve investing in technologies that can disrupt the cartel's drone operations. The government could also disrupt cartel finances by targeting their funding sources. So far, the U.S. government has been implementing several methods to stop cartel activities, and interestingly, they're not the only ones in the fight. Alongside the U.S., Mexico is also fighting against cartels, although not violently. In response to a surge in cartel violence, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has recently deployed thousands of troops alongside her top security officials to Sinaloa in an effort to contain the escalating bloodshed in the area. Initially, during her campaign, Sheinbaum had pledged to continue her predecessor's security strategy, which focused on addressing the root social causes of crime rather than directly confronting the cartels. This approach, commonly referred to as hugs, not bullets, prioritized social programs and economic development over military action. However, based on the president's recent move, it shows that she's taking a significant shift in Mexico's approach to organized crime. The crackdown efforts made by Mexican security personnel have already led to high-profile arrests and significant drug seizures. This more proactive security approach somehow aligns with the priorities of President Trump, who has repeatedly called for stronger measures to curb drug trafficking and illegal migration from Mexico into the United States. Judging from these recent policies and actions, it's evident that the battle against cartels has only gotten fiercer, which begs the question, how will the war end? How will this war end? Analysis from experts has revealed that if this war continues, then Mexican cartels will likely continue to retaliate against the Delta forces and Mexican security agents. A full-scale war against Mexican drug cartels would have serious consequences, affecting not only the cartels themselves, but also Mexico's economy, government, and society. The narcotics trade is deeply embedded in Mexico's economic structure, employing an estimated 175,000 people and generating billions of dollars annually. Also beyond their financial influence, cartels maintain control over regions where they function as quasi-governments, often enjoying local support. There are even claims that numerous officials are suspected of being on their payroll. If the U.S. were to take military action against the cartels, the response from these criminal organizations could be extreme. Known for their brutality, cartels have demonstrated a willingness to retaliate with horrific violence, including beheadings and mass executions. Over the years, they have significantly increased their firepower, in some cases acquiring weapons that are originally supplied by the U.S. government. Today, some of these groups are reported to possess Javelin missile launchers, armored vehicles, and even former military personnel within their ranks, making them formidable opponents. Cartels have adopted modern techniques that are similar to those used by extremist groups like ISIS. They leverage social media platforms such as Telegram and WhatsApp to spread fear, recruit members, and showcase their violent acts. Shockingly, thousands of users engage with cartel content, including gruesome execution videos that are intended to intimidate journalists, politicians, and law enforcement officials. But here's the thing. While cartels frequently use terrorist-style tactics to exert control over the Mexican government and local populations, they have historically avoided direct conflict with U.S. law enforcement or tourists. Their primary targets have remained Mexican officials, including police officers, prosecutors, mayors, and journalists. However, as the conflict escalates, it's still possible for cartel violence to spill over into bigger confrontations, especially if U.S. military intervention disrupts their operations. A new report has claimed that proposed attacks on Mexican cartels could lead to American casualties. The idea of deploying U.S. troops or launching military strikes in Mexico to combat drug cartels has gained traction among several Republicans, especially Donald Trump. Supporters of this approach argue that direct military action is necessary to curb the flow of fentanyl into the United States. However, U.S. military and government officials warn that such a strategy could lead to unintended consequences, including casualties on both sides of the border and violent retaliation against American citizens. Despite the urgency of the issue, experts argue that military intervention in Mexico is unlikely to be an effective solution and could instead create new security challenges. Additionally, targeting fentanyl production is not as straightforward as some might assume. Fentanyl labs are difficult to locate, and this increases the risk of civilian casualties if raids mistakenly target the wrong locations. As an example of the dangers involved, officials point to a violent confrontation in Culiacan, Mexico, where Mexican soldiers clashed with cartel gunmen during the arrest of one of El Chapo's sons. guns. The battle resulted in at least 10 military personnel and 19 cartel members killed. While calls for military action somehow prove the urgency of the fentanyl crisis, experts caution that a more sophisticated approach is necessary. Rather than direct military intervention, they advocate for enhanced intelligence sharing and stronger cooperation between U.S. and Mexican authorities. This approach will require not just force, but also diplomacy and strategic efforts to disrupt cartel operations without escalating the already existing violence. As the crisis continues to unfold, new suggestions are beginning to surface. One of these is a method of mutual assured destruction for both Mexico and the U.S. This approach suggests both the U.S. and Mexico could collectively eradicate their problems whilst maintaining peace and diplomacy. For a long time, both countries have struggled with cartel violence and gun trafficking. While the U.S. government has long pressured Mexico to crack down on drug cartels, Mexico has repeatedly called for stronger measures by the U.S. to prevent firearms from being smuggled into their country. One of Mexico's primary concerns is the influx of assault weapons from the United States, which are frequently used by drug gangs in violent crimes. The Mexican government has estimated that nearly 600,000 firearms are trafficked across the border annually, with 70% of recovered weapons originating from the U.S. In an effort to hold American gun manufacturers accountable, Mexico filed a $10 billion lawsuit against major firearms producers, including Beretta and Colt. The case, which was backed by several U.S. states and the District of Columbia, argued that gun companies knowingly supply a market that fuels violence and instability in Mexico. They also argued that some firearms appear to be intentionally designed to appeal to cartel members. For example, a gold-plated pistol known as the Super El Jefe, meaning the boss, has been linked to cartel leaders. Things like this have raised questions about the role of manufacturers in catering to criminal markets. In response, gun manufacturers have pushed back, citing legal protections under the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. This federal law shields gun companies from liability when their products are used in crimes. Recently, the debate over U.S. weapons in Mexico intersected with diplomatic negotiations between the two nations. As part of a last-minute agreement to avoid trade tariffs, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announced that the U.S. had pledged to intensify efforts to prevent the smuggling of high-powered firearms into Mexico. However, after the U.S. government designated Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, tensions escalated, and Sheinbaum warned that Mexico could expand its lawsuit against gun manufacturers. While the U.S. current approach to combat cartels is still being debated, there are already efforts being made to find a more comprehensive strategy. In the meantime, discussions are still up and people have started talking. A Reddit user recently asked how drug cartels will fare against the U.S. military. In response to the post, another user stated that the fight won't be easy for both parties. The user wrote that cartels could go into the community just like it happened in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Gaza. The battle could turn out to be a blind attack with significant U.S. casualties and many innocent people killed. In another Reddit post, a user also discussed the possibility of the U.S. military beating cartels, and in response, this user cited how difficult it would be for the U.S. military to fight cartels. The user's argument is that the military has to follow rules of engagement and account for collateral damages. This is something cartels don't do, and that singular factor makes the fight much more complicated. Over the years, Mexican cartels have continued to wreak havoc, causing multiple deaths both in their country and the United States. For this reason, the U.S. is determined to take them down, and it is employing every means possible to make it happen. What are your thoughts on the Delta Force attack on Mexican cartels? Let me know in the comments section, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, then be sure to click on this next card on your screen.